According to Customs and Border Protection, 90% of heroin, 88% of cocaine, 87% of meth, and 80% of fentanyl seized in the fiscal year 2018 was confiscated at legal crossing points, not in the middle of nowhere on some desert patch where there is no wall. So is building a giant, vast wall along the border really going to stem the flow of drugs? Joining me now, former CIA officer and host of the Buck Sexton Show podcast. It is Buck Sexton. Hi, Buck.
Hey, Kennedy, how are you?
The buck is back. The buck starts here.
You're kind of pulling me in two directions here because I agree with you in general philosophically about broad legalization. However, on the point about a border barrier, and I was just down in the San Diego sector last week. I spent the week with Border Patrol. It's right, as you know, pushed up between, the fence is right between Tijuana, city of over 1 million people, and San Diego, another large urban area. And when you're talking about trying to create a fence, specifically as a problem for cartel activity, keep in mind that the human smuggling networks are actually entirely cartel networks. So start with that.
Okay,
and
but that is a different issue altogether. And the president is talking specifically about drugs, eradicating the drug trade, cutting it in half, and cutting crime in half in this country.
I know, but
he's
there was a
using
comma.
no statistics, no data, and no facts to bolster that argument, which has now become the critical centerpiece of his wall claim.
So the human smuggling component, we'll table that. I just wanted to note that is a big portion of how a lot of cartel profits, hundreds of millions of dollars, are actually being made now on drugs specifically, on illicit substances. There's a lot of drugs, Kennedy, that come into the country that they don't find. In fact, really part of the problem is that the seizures that are occurring are much more likely to occur at ports of entry and via inspections of the mail than they are through wide open areas where there's really very little, if any, checkpoint or procedure that's there for them to go through.
Okay, I went to the El Chapo trial last week. I'm going to go again tomorrow or Thursday. And the whole thing is fascinating because if you listen to the ways they're not talking about sending people with backpacks through Nogales in the middle of the night. They're not talking about, you can't, the type of demand we have in this country can't be met with smuggling drugs through the desert in the poorest sections where there's not enough border fencing.
No, this is true. I mean, and I'm certainly not going to argue. I heard the same statistics that you did about seizures from CBP, right? 'Cause it's the same CBP. But they also would tell you that it raises the cost of doing business for the cartels and makes it harder for them to get more drugs into the country. So all I'm saying is that when you look at the extension of a barrier, border fence, whatever people want to call it, it assists in all aspects of security. So it's essentially like, do you want to have a lock on the front door of your house? Even if you have a lock, the burglars can come in through the windows. They can come in through the ceiling. There's a lot of things that they can do to get around that.
Yeah, but it's also like saying if I have a lock on my front door, all of a sudden not as much light is going to get in.
Well, you're hoping that the burglar. So we're really going to beat this analogy to death. Sure. You're hoping that the burglar has to expend more energy and resources than they otherwise would. But look, to your point, there's also the possibility.
But how many? Okay, but I want to stop you there for a second because that's drug warrior mentality, and you're better than that. And we talked about this in the past.
I'm not a drug warrior.
I know that. But that's the kind of mentality, like we have to spend more money, we need more resources, and that's how we're finally going to stop drugs from coming into the country. Let's say you have a giant wall and border agents and drones and drug-sniffing dogs and technology that is able to scan entire...
The tech is where I was going, but yeah.
I understand that.
Right.
You still have a bunch of people in the United States who have a demand for drugs. And all of that stuff and all of that money and all those resources and the 500,000 people who've been killed in the war on drugs in Mexico alone, none of that is going to bring them back. It also doesn't stop the demand. And I think that is the critical area where we're not having an honest conversation.
Well, the DEA, which has gone after doctors, legitimate doctors, very aggressively for prescribing, they would say over-prescribing. In some cases, though, Kennedy, that I know of, it's pretty borderline. I mean, DEA has guidelines that sometimes infringe upon what people think is good medicine. It's an ongoing conversation, and that's a whole other thing that we could talk about.
That also has nothing to do with the border wall. Over-prescribing opiates has nothing to do with the border wall. I'm
trying to agree with you on something. I'm just saying that they've had a 30% reduction in opioid prescriptions from doctors, and they estimate that 30% drop has been entirely filled in by the illegal drugs coming in, as you're saying. So
you know what else it's been filled in by? the legal cannabis that people can now legitimately buy. And the more sophisticated that market gets, people will be able to treat various ailments with greater specificity and more efficiency.
I mean, I'm not somebody who's touched weed in decades, and I've been for legalization for decades. So, I mean, I think that, you know, we're kind of having two conversations. While these drugs are illegal and they're enriching the cartels, there are ways to try to limit their spread into this country and make it harder for people to...
And the best, most efficient way of doing that is to end prohibition of drugs, even if you find them to be immoral, and refocus our energy on addiction and treatment and not incarceration and spending billions of dollars on a drug war that is failing. Buck, you're awesome. You're smart, and we have areas where we agree completely, but it's so much fun when we get to.
It's so good to see. I mean, I can't really see you, but I you know what I mean? I kind of can.
I'm doing this. Buck Sexton, thank you so much. Have a good night. You too.